I found a hickey on her neck and she threatened to throw me in jail if I didn't pay $2,000. How she blackmailed me, how I documented everything, got legal help and escaped the nightmare. I don't usually post like this, but I can't keep pretending everything's fine. If you're reading this, know I'm tired, confused, and I need real advice. I'm 24, in a relationship that's been 4 years and 2 months, and I've reached a point where money, trust, and threats have become the daily noise I can't drown out. I'm sharing this because I need honest, practical voices. No sugarcoating, no lectures. My name is Damien. I changed names and some details to protect privacy, but everything else is real. When I met Crystal, she was 20 and I was 20. We fell into a fast rhythm, nights out, late conversations, and a feeling that we were the kind of couple who could outpace problems by being together. At the beginning, I had a steady job and some disposable income. I didn't think much about where the money went. I liked seeing her happy, so I bought things, paid for nights out, and prioritized her comfort over small personal wants. For 2 years I had a pattern I regret now. I could spend almost $100 a day on her, which added up to what felt like endless generosity. I sold things I liked, I quit small pleasures, and I convinced myself this was love. I thought money fixed things or at least bought loyalty, but it only hid insecurity and made me more dependent. I was not mature about boundaries and I gave more than I should have, sometimes to my own detriment. About 6 months into the relationship, I saw messages that made my stomach drop. She had been talking to an older classmate who helped her with schoolwork. I scrolled through and found him asking why she wasn't talking as much. He asked if she had someone else. She replied she didn't. When I brought it up, she dismissed it as nothing and blamed male expectations, saying men stop helping once they think you have a partner. I asked her to be honest. She brushed it off and the argument ended with her storming out. We moved on, but the seed of doubt was planted. The pattern repeated. At first I was controlling because I was scared. I knew that sounded toxic when people told me, and I started to try to change. She loved going to parties and sometimes canceled plans last minute to be out with friends. For a while I tried to loosen my grip and said, "Okay, go live your life." But the jealousy didn't disappear. I kept making deals with myself that I wouldn't be the paranoid person anymore, and then I broke them. Over time our fights became heavier. She would disappear for hours and come back like nothing had happened, and I would cry, try to understand, and promise I would be different. I sold game accounts and even my collectible cards because I thought it would show commitment. I convinced myself losing those things wasn't a loss if it kept us together. I stopped saving and started sinking my money into holding something that felt more and more unstable. A few months ago, she started demanding repayment for money she had loaned me. She set a hard deadline and threatened to go to authorities if I didn't pay. She said she had photos and stories she would use against me, and she mentioned a law in my country that could put a man behind bars if a woman accused him of violence. She used that threat like a weapon during fights, and I felt powerless. I work inconsistent hours now. Some weeks I get called in, some weeks I do not. My family is abroad. They left me some debts. I can't simply ask them for money without adding pressure to their lives, and I was ashamed to tell them everything. Everything finally cracked a few weeks ago when I found a hickey on her neck after a night out. The sight of it hit me like someone opening a door I'd kept closed for years. I asked her about it and she said it was a mistake. She told me to take what's mine and leave. She wanted to cut ties and have the money returned. I started to cry and begged her not to destroy both of our lives. She was cold. That morning she said I had to pay $2,000 by midnight or else. I did what any frightened person would do. I recorded conversations, saved messages, and blocked her for a time to stop the escalation. I did not know what else to do in the moment. I kept copies of everything because I feared she would lie, and because she had already used imaginary injuries as leverage in past fights. I couldn't risk being painted as the aggressor when I had been pleading for trust. I also reached out to a friend who is studying law. I wanted to understand my options. My friend warned me that legal systems can be one-sided if allegations are made without context. He advised me to gather evidence, document everything, and consult a lawyer if she actually files anything. He said a lawyer might ask for the messages I had saved and would likely recommend a formal response if necessary. He didn't promise safety, and he made it clear that money and legal counsel cost. That felt like another cliff. I tried to think practically. I contacted someone I trust to borrow a small amount so I would have breathing room to negotiate, not to give in to her demands. I clarified that I was borrowing the minimum necessary and I would present a plan to repay. The person who lent me money did it because they believed I was trying to protect myself and not be manipulated. I feel grateful but small for having to ask for help to avoid being cornered by someone I loved. At night I replay every choice. I ask myself where I went wrong. I counted all the nights I put her before my own stability. I think about how I excused things because I didn't want to be alone. I think about how I mistook compensating with gifts for emotional currency. I realize now those were distractions from serious communication problems. I should have set limits earlier and I should have kept copies of our agreements. I know I was not blameless. I was controlling. I let fear and insecurity run my decisions. I didn't always listen, and I let my pride shrink me into paying for what I'd rather protect with boundaries. I own that part and I don't bring it up to justify her behavior. It's not a contest of whose sins are heavier. I'm trying to be honest so I can figure out how to stop the cycle. There are nights when I feel completely stuck. I imagine waking up one day without her and without the debt. I imagine starting to build a small safety net. But then reality returns. The law she mentioned exists and my country's system can be harsh when accusations are made. She has threatened to say I abused her physically and to use images of injuries she caused herself. That threat feels like a lever in a power game I didn't sign up to play. I'm scared of being jailed, and I'm scared of being left penniless. I'm also scared of staying in a relationship that erodes me. I don't want to be the guy who only sees value in providing gifts. I want a life where I can pay my rent and feel steady. Part of me wonders if I should comply with her demand to avoid immediate disaster. Another part knows that giving in would only reward manipulation and make escape even harder. Today I cleaned my phone, organized a folder with screenshots of our conversations, and wrote a timeline of events from the day we met until now. I put dates next to arguments, gifts, and incidents. I wrote down the nights she came home late, and the times I forgave her when I should have said no. The act of writing felt like reclaiming history from fog. It reminded me that facts matter and memory is safer when it's recorded. My friends are split between pay and be done, and fight this legally. One person told me I should let it go and pay quietly to avoid escalation. Another insisted that if she files false claims, I should face her with evidence. Both answers feel incomplete because I don't have the resources for an expensive legal battle, but I also don't want to live under a threat that could destroy me overnight. If I'm honest, I want to leave the relationship. I want to get therapy and learn how to stop reaching for validation through possessions. I want to rebuild my finances slowly and be less vulnerable to blackmail. I want to have friends who are not part of the conflict, and to set boundaries so that when someone asks for help, it doesn't cost me everything. I want to be the person who can say no without panic. I don't know what will happen next. For now I'm documenting, borrowing just enough to delay a crisis, and preparing to consult a lawyer if she follows through with her threats. I am trying to keep emotion from rushing every decision. Tomorrow my plan is to talk to that law student again and see if he can point me to affordable legal clinics or pro bono options. I will try to keep receipts of payments, record offers to settle, and avoid solo confrontations that could be twisted against me. I share this because I need real advice from people who know what it's like to be cornered emotionally and financially. I need suggestions about how to protect myself in a system that can be unfair, and I need to know how to leave without falling back into the same mistakes. If you have experience with domestic accusation laws, debt disputes in relationships, or low-cost legal help, please tell me. If you have emotional advice about how to stop giving away what keeps you afloat, I'm listening. I am scared but still hopeful. I am not perfect, but I'm trying to be honest now. If I have to choose one lesson from this mess, it is this: set boundaries earlier and keep records. Protect your finances and your time. Don't let affection become an excuse for losing yourself. I will keep posting updates because I need accountability and because maybe someone else will read this and avoid the same mistakes. I keep thinking about the small details. How she used to laugh at dumb jokes I made, how we planned imaginary trips and never booked them, how I would prioritize her food over my own bills. Small things became leverage long before threats started. When money becomes a bargaining chip, every gesture loses its original meaning and turns into currency in an argument. Sometimes I rehearse ways out in my head. I imagine telling her calmly that I will make a repayment plan and that any threats will have to go through proper channels. I imagine asking for a written agreement if she claims she loaned me money. The problem is that when someone already weaponizes the legal system as a threat, asking for a calm discussion can feel naive. I am learning that language and documentation matter more than dramatics. There are nights I try to sleep and plan budgets on the back of envelopes. I calculate how long it would take me to save even a small cushion if I stopped spending money on distractions and focused on essentials. The math is ugly but honest. Sacrifice small comforts, pick up extra shifts when I can, and avoid lending or borrowing from people who mix money and emotion. Planning feels like the only thing I can control. I've also started reading about emotional manipulation and gaslighting. Recognizing the patterns has been painful and clarifying. When someone threatens you with legal consequences to secure money, that's not love, it's coercion. Acknowledging that doesn't erase my mistakes, but it helps me prioritize safety. Safety means legal protection and emotional distance when possible. Practical steps I'm considering include opening a separate bank account and moving any money I can into it, asking for written agreements for any financial aid I give or receive, and setting up a simple repayment plan in case we agree to settle. I know those steps are basic, but they are also what I should have done from the start. Small administrative choices can prevent catastrophic escalation. I'm nervous about posting this because some people will say I should have known better or called the police earlier. I accept accountability, but I also need to know how people survive when they are cornered and the stakes are legal and financial. If you've been through this, tell me what concrete steps helped you. I'm not asking for platitudes. I'm asking for a plan that helps me stay safe and solvent. Right now my priority is to protect myself legally and financially while trying to leave this without blowing up either of our lives unnecessarily. I want steps that are realistic for someone with unstable income and limited family support. Please help me, please. She said, "Give me the money or I will ruin you," and I said, "I can't. Tonight I am tired but awake. I will sleep knowing I made a folder with evidence and borrowed a small emergency amount. I will try to breathe and plan. I am not asking for pity. I'm asking for practical steps. Tomorrow I will share what my friend studying law tells me and the first concrete action I take. For now I ask, what would you do if you were me?" A few weeks ago I found signs she had been with someone else. She demanded $2,000 and threatened to accuse me of abuse if I didn't pay. I've been saving messages, trying to negotiate, and feeling trapped between paying and being blackmailed. I borrowed a small emergency amount and started looking for legal help so I could buy time and document everything. I thought I could handle it quietly. After I found the hickey and she gave me the deadline, I tried the one option that felt like the least dramatic: negotiate. I messaged her asking for a clear list of what she claimed I owed and proposed a payment schedule I could actually manage. I wrote it in plain language: dates, amounts, and a promise to pay what I could while I found steady work. I thought if I showed willingness, she'd stop with threats. He texted me back a short, blunt reply that I saved as a screenshot. "What do you mean a plan? You have until midnight. Pay or I will go to the police." I replied, "Send me the list and I'll draw a schedule. I want this settled." Her next text was harsher: "I will make it worse if you stall." A friend later read the thread and told me, "Document every message. Do not call." Her answer surprised me. Instead of responding with numbers, she dug into more threats and sentences that felt designed to panic me. She asked for a lump sum by midnight and said she would make it worse if I didn't comply. I told her calmly I couldn't meet that deadline and that I wanted to find a compromise. She accused me of trying to stall and flipped the conversation into emotional attacks. I tried to keep the tone neutral and use the messages as a trail, but the more I pushed for details, the argument got angrier and less productive. I started to document everything in real time. I made folders for screenshots, backed them up to multiple cloud drives, and exported text threads as PDFs. I kept payment receipts for what I had already returned and marked dates when she told me she had loaned something. I took screenshots of her threats. Collecting evidence felt like a small, steady way to take control when everything else felt chaotic. There was a night I tried to call her and ask if we could at least agree to a plan that wouldn't ruin either of us. I even typed a message that said, "Please, tell me the amount and dates. We can sign a plan and avoid the police." I thought a sober conversation might be possible. I rehearsed phrases in my head: "Let's write this down, sign it, and follow a plan." I even suggested a neutral third party to witness it. She didn't want mediation. She said, "Either the money or I go to the police," and then hung up. That cut through any illusion of negotiation. What she wanted wasn't a fair deal, it was leverage. After that call, I blocked her on social apps so I wouldn't keep spiraling through messages. That was the first time I felt a sliver of relief. Blocking felt like a boundary I should have put up years ago. I didn't delete the chat backups. I just stopped engaging. I was careful to preserve everything so nothing could be erased later. I also set my phone not to show message previews so I wouldn't get pulled back into panic. When I blocked her, she sent a barrage of texts using alternate numbers and friends' phones. I saved those messages too. I started to label each screenshot: date, time, and context. It was tedious and emotionally exhausting, but it felt necessary. Every new message that tried to gaslight me, every attempt to guilt me, became another file in a folder I could point to if things escalated. One practical move I made immediately was to freeze any ongoing automatic transfers that could be routed to her. I checked bank app settings, paused shared payment arrangements, and changed passwords where necessary. I didn't try to be sneaky. I documented each change and the reason. The goal was to reduce friction and prevent impulsive transfers that would leave me more vulnerable. I reached out to a friend for small practical help, not to rescue me fully, but to stabilize the next 1 or 2 weeks. I explained the situation and showed the messages. I asked for a short-term loan under the condition that I would write a clear repayment schedule. That person agreed but made it clear they wanted proof and a timeline. That was one of the most adult moments I had in months. Asking clearly, accepting terms, and promising to follow through. It felt humbling and also oddly empowering. At the same time, I started researching my country's laws in a very focused way. I didn't go deep into forums or theories. I looked for official statements and simple summaries about accusations of domestic violence and the burden of proof for criminal charges. I made a list of legal aid clinics, pro bono options available for low-income folks, and university law clinics that sometimes take on cases or at least offer initial consultations. I didn't act yet, but the list gave me options. While collecting evidence, I had to be careful not to engage in anything that could be spun against me. I avoided confrontational calls and didn't go to places where she might fabricate a scene. My friend suggested I avoid direct contact unless mediated and to do all communications via text so they would be recordable. That felt strange because part of me wanted to resolve things face-to-face, but logic won. Text equals evidence, and evidence matters. I also thought about the optics of borrowing money from someone I trust. I made a written agreement with a friend who lent me the emergency funds. We typed it up and both signed a simple repayment plan. The doc included dates, a clear amount, and consequences if I defaulted. It wasn't a notarized document, but it was formal enough to keep us accountable and to show a record if needed. Doing that taught me that paperwork could be an ally, not a cold formality. A few nights in, when my adrenaline wasn't constant, I tried to map scenarios. If she filed a complaint, what were the likely outcomes? If she didn't, what would happen if I paid? I realized there were moral and strategic trade-offs. Paying might stop the immediate threat but would reward intimidation and probably make future blackmail easier. Not paying could lead to legal trouble I might not be able to afford to defend. Those were the cold equations I had to weigh. Emotionally, this part was brutal. I had to handle shame and admit I had let things get this far. The shame made me want to hide, but I resisted by reaching out to a couple of trusted friends and writing in a private journal. I tracked my mental state in short notes. Days I felt panic attacks starting, nights I slept poorly, moments of clarity. Keeping a log of how I felt helped on days when everything seemed too heavy to bear. It made the chaos measurable. A key negotiating tactic I tried was offering a realistic partial payment plan in writing. I proposed small installments linked to specific dates and tied to concrete income sources, not vague promises. I suggested checks or payments through methods that left receipts. I told her I would accept a mediator or lawyer to help formalize it. Her response was refusal and more threats. That's when I knew the issue wasn't the money. It was control. At that point, I decided I needed at least one professional opinion before making any moves. I set up a meeting with a local legal aid office and explained the situation with the preserved messages. The intake volunteer was empathetic and said they could offer a short consultation and possibly refer me to pro bono counsel if the case fit certain criteria. That gave me a small but crucial piece of hope. I wasn't alone in navigating the system. Preparing for that consultation meant organizing the timeline of events and printing out key screenshots. I labeled documents, gift receipts, payment offers, threat messages, and dated incidents. I included a short narrative explaining context for each item. When I walked into the legal aid office, I didn't cry. I felt measured. That walk was a turning point because it concretized my plan from reactive to structured. During the free consultation, the lawyer, not yet retained, explained possible defenses and the steps I'd need to take if she followed through with a false accusation. He emphasized the importance of having a timeline, witnesses, and documentation of any physical evidence. He also warned that legal processes are imperfect and that I should brace for stress even if I had strong documentation. He suggested contacting a local community organization that supports men who are falsely accused, as they sometimes provide guidance and peer support. He also said something else important. Even when the legal system is intimidating, your best defense is mitigation and preparedness. That meant not engaging in public arguments, not trying to force a confrontation, and not paying under duress without an official agreement. He recommended a letter sent through the legal aid office proposing a formal repayment plan and asking for confirmation that no legal steps would be taken if both parties signed. That letter would serve as a record and could de-escalate the immediate threat. I asked if sending such a letter could provoke her. He said it could, but its existence strengthens your position. The idea was to show willingness to resolve, and at the same time not to be bullied into an immediate lump sum. He also suggested keeping communications through the lawyer or mediator going forward. I couldn't afford full representation then, but the advice was priceless. After the consult, I drafted the repayment plan as suggested and shared it with a friend who loaned me the emergency money. They reviewed it and agreed the terms were fair. That gave me a cover story to show the legal intake volunteer if needed. I had tried to resolve things in good faith. It also framed me as someone who was trying to be responsible, which felt important for my peace of mind. One thing I had to do was commit to financial changes. I opened a new, separate account and moved a small emergency cushion there. I also set up a very strict monthly budget centered on essentials and a repayment plan for the emergency loan. I canceled subscriptions I didn't need and set up alerts for low balances. That level of detail felt exhausting but necessary. It made me feel a bit more in control. I made sure to tell my closest friends exactly what to do if anything escalated. One friend agreed to be a witness who could state my whereabouts for certain nights and provide context about my character. Another agreed to hold copies of my evidence in their email in case anything happened to my phone. Those were small but powerful steps to add resilience. Meanwhile, I tried to avoid any moves that could be used against me. I avoided meetings alone with her, I didn't post anything on social media about the situation, and I didn't let mutual friends be pulled into the conflict publicly. Maintaining low visibility reduced opportunities for fabrications. It also helped me emotionally because I couldn't amplify the drama. There were nights I questioned whether I should have just paid and moved on. Those thoughts are normal, and I didn't ignore them. I made a pros/cons list about paying versus fighting. Paying could mean peace in the short term but risked future manipulation. Not paying meant stress and potential legal battles but preserved a future where I couldn't be extorted repeatedly. That chart, cold on paper, helped me sleep better because decisions felt less like storms and more like plans. As the week passed, she continued to send messages from alternate numbers, some pleading, some violent, some trying to pull me in. I didn't respond. I forwarded the messages to the legal aid contact and labeled the folder with dates. When I finally heard back from the volunteer lawyer, they suggested a next step. Send a formal letter proposing mediation and warning that false accusations would be challenged with the documentation I had. They warned again that the system can be unpredictable, but that a documented attempt to resolve things in good faith matters. Preparing that letter was an exercise in restraint. I didn't vent in it. I stuck to facts, dates, and reasonable offers. I proposed small installments linked to clear dates and asked for written confirmation that she wouldn't file anything if we followed the plan. I included a clause that both parties would sign and that any deviation could be addressed by arbitration. The letter was cool and professional, which was the exact opposite of how things had felt in private. After sending the letter through the legal aid office, I waited. Waiting felt impossible, but I diverted energy into work and budgeting and therapy apps that offered free sessions for low-income users. Taking care of my mental health in small, structured ways made the rest more bearable. That's where I am now. I negotiated the only way I could, through documentation, boundaries, and small emergency loans backed by written promises. I blocked her to avoid panic. I recorded and labeled every threatening message, and I sought low-cost legal help. I didn't let the situation be private theater anymore. I made it a set of dated facts. I'm not naive. I know none of this guarantees safety. But I finally have a playbook, evidence, documented offers to pay reasonably, legal consultation, and an emergency cushion that buys time. That felt like progress. It didn't solve everything, but it shifted power from reaction to planning. I found a hickey on her neck. She demanded $2,000 by midnight and threatened to accuse me of abuse if I didn't pay. I blocked her, saved screenshots, borrowed a small emergency amount with a written repayment plan, and consulted a legal aid clinic. I sent a formal, fact-based repayment proposal through the clinic and waited for a reply while I tightened my budget and organized evidence. The week after the legal aid office sent the letter felt like sitting at a crossroads. I kept expecting the worst, but instead I got silence for 3 days and then a single message from her that was short and vague. "We need to talk." I didn't call. I forwarded the message to the intake lawyer and asked whether replying could be risky. He said any reply should be brief and through the letter's proposed channel, and only if it addressed the repayment plan directly. I replied with a one-line text offering to confirm dates if she provided the amounts in writing. That was the most neutral, least emotional response I could manage. While waiting, I made a hard decision I had been circling for months. I would start detaching emotionally and physically from the relationship and prepare for a formal separation unless a safe, verifiable resolution appeared. That was not dramatic or cinematic. It was administrative. I wrote out logistics, what I would need to take, what I would leave behind, and an emergency contact list. I drafted a simple exit timeline that prioritized safety and minimized financial fallout. The timeline included moving key documents to a secure folder, arranging transport, and setting a target date to have a separate bank account fully seated. A major part of the strategy was doubling down on small, realistic financial changes. I made a budget that was ruthlessly basic: rent, utilities, food, minimal transit, and the emergency loan repayment. Everything else was paused. I scheduled extra shifts where possible and set an automatic transfer of a tiny amount to my new emergency account every paycheck. That tiny habit felt humiliating at first, like saving pennies while the problem felt enormous, but it built momentum. Money is boring but decisive, and the act of automatic saving moved me from panic to a plan. Legally, the next steps from the legal aid clinic were clear. Keep documenting, avoid direct confrontations, and only communicate through written channels that could be archived. They also suggested a defensive letter that made clear I had documentation and witnesses, and asked the other side to confirm in writing whether they intended to file criminal charges. Importantly, the letter avoided accusations. Its purpose was to create a recorded trail showing my attempt to resolve things in good faith and my willingness to sign a formal repayment agreement. One practical piece of advice that landed with me was to secure corroborating witnesses and records for nights and incidents that might be misrepresented. Friends who agreed to be witnesses wrote short statements about my whereabouts on specific dates. I emailed copies of these statements to 2 trusted friends and the legal aid email so there was an off-phone record. I also printed a timeline with receipts and message screenshots and put a copy in my trusted friend's email. Redundancy matters when someone weaponizes memory. After 2 weeks, there was finally a longer reply from her. It was terse and alternating. She accused me of being spiteful for involving a lawyer, and she demanded an updated immediate payment. She included some messages that, taken out of context, could look bad. I forwarded those to the legal aid contact immediately and asked whether I should respond. The lawyer suggested responding in writing only through the lawyer letter, reiterate the repayment plan, note receipt of her messages, and offer mediation as a way to formalize terms without police involvement. We agreed to mediation mediated by a community mediator who sometimes works with the legal clinic on low-cost cases. The mediator's role was to confirm the repayment schedule and secure a mutual written agreement. For me, that was the best-case scenario. It avoided police and court, created a neutral record, and required both parties to commit to terms. I prepared for the mediation by printing out the repayment plan, bringing proof of the emergency loan, and having a witness in the waiting room. I also ran through calm, factual language I would use and reminded myself not to escalate emotionally. On mediation day, I was nervous but steady. The mediator read the terms aloud and asked whether both parties agreed. She pushed back on some amounts, and we negotiated a modest adjustment that I could realistically meet. The mediator suggested a clause: if she filed charges within 60 days after signing, the The mediation agreement would be considered contested and the mediator could supply records to my counsel. She asked for clear dates and specific amounts. When the agreement was signed, both parties left calm and with written commitments. I want to be honest. Signing that agreement didn't instantly make everything okay. It didn't erase the fear that had lived under my ribs for months. What it did do was reduce immediate leverage. With a signed document, the threat of sudden ruin felt less plausible. It also gave me breathing room to follow through with the practical steps I had already started. One of those practical steps was formalizing my financial independence. Moving forward, I set up a 3-track plan: emergency buffer, debt repayment, and long-term saving. The emergency buffer had the highest priority. Its target was modest, but it would be untouchable except for verified emergencies. The debt repayment schedule for the friend who lent money was explicit. Small weekly payments with a final date. I automated payments so there was no temptation to skip. I also blocked non-essential spending and closed accounts that left me vulnerable to impulsive transfers. Therapy became another non-negotiable. I joined a low-cost counseling program and committed to weekly sessions for 3 months. Therapy wasn't a magic fix. It was a place to examine why I had allowed boundaries to erode and to rebuild healthier patterns. My therapist helped me practice saying no without collapsing into panic and identify triggers that pushed me toward compensating with gifts or money. Therapy also provided tools to manage anxiety during legal uncertainty. At the same time, I strengthened my social safeguards. I told 2 new friends about the situation, people who are not tied to our shared social circle, and asked them to check in on me occasionally. Those calls were small acts of accountability that kept me grounded. I also unfollowed social accounts that made me compare or feel inadequate, which reduced emotional whiplash and helped me reallocate mental energy toward concrete tasks. A week after mediation, the signed agreement seemed to do its job. The tone of her messages cooled and she stopped promising immediate legal action. That relief was not total. I still watched for signs of escalation. I kept copies of receipts and communication, and I updated my evidence folder weekly. I also told the legal aid clinic about the mediation outcome so they had a record and could advise if anything changed. There were moments I had to confront my own responsibility. I acknowledged patterns, preferring short-term peace over long-term boundaries, giving material gifts instead of asking for emotional labor, and tolerating disrespect. Owning those patterns was painful but vital. I started small rituals to break the cycle, checking in with a friend before making large purchases, waiting 72 hours before reacting to any emotionally charged message, and keeping a written budget that required approval from no one but myself. The final, hardest decision was ending the relationship formally. After mediation, I presented a brief written message. I was committed to finishing the repayment plan and to moving forward separately. I focused on clarity and neutrality, not accusations. I signed the message with a note that I cared about both our safety and that legal channels could handle any disputes. I expected pushback, and there was some emotional messaging, but the ground felt firmer because the mediation agreement existed and because I had documented everything. Leaving was not a single dramatic night. It was small acts, changing the locks where needed, moving my documents, transferring savings to the separate account, and removing shared logins. I posted no public declarations and kept the exit contained to practical steps. In the weeks that followed, I felt grief and relief in unpredictable waves. I missed familiar rituals and also recognized that the patterns I had tolerated were unlikely to change without both of us doing deep work. What I kept closest was the lesson about boundaries and records. I learned that saying yes to immediate comfort had cost me more than money. It cost me autonomy. I learned that documentation is not paranoia. It's protection. I learned to separate affection from financial decisions and to insist on written agreements before money or favors cross into being leverage. If you ask me what concrete actions actually helped, here are the ones I'd list plainly. Document everything, involve a legal aid clinic early, secure a small emergency fund but formalize it with a repayment plan, get a mediator if possible, set rigid financial boundaries, start therapy, and create a personal support network outside the conflict. Those are not glamorous, but they work. 2 months after the mediation, the signed agreement is being followed and the threats have stopped. I still pay weekly for the loan, and I'm rebuilding slowly. My days are not fixed yet, but they contain systems, automatic savings, therapy sessions, and a supplier of small work that keeps cash flow honest. I am less available for drama and more available for myself. That feels like progress. This experience changed how I think about love and responsibility. I used to equate proving love with giving until I had nothing left. Now I see that protecting myself is part of loving others, including the person I used to be. I plan to keep that commitment, to set boundaries early, to keep records, to insist on written agreements, and to reach for help before things become leverage. If you're in a similar situation, I won't pretend there's a one-size-fits-all fix. But I will insist on practical moves that mattered for me. Stop engaging in one-on-one confrontations, document, seek legal advice, formalize any loans, and build a small financial cushion. And get therapy. These moves won't erase guilt or fear overnight, but they give you a scaffold to rebuild. Finally, I want to say this: leaving a manipulative relationship doesn't make you weak. It makes you human and decisive. I still carry regret for my role in the mess, but I also carry a plan that keeps me safe and sane. For anyone reading this who helped me along the way, thank you. For anyone who needs to hear it, prioritize your safety and your future over immediate peace. This is the last update I'll post about the specifics. I'll still check in occasionally about recovery and rebuilding, but the chapter of escalation and threats is closed for me. If you want practical templates, repayment plan formats, a mediation checklist, or a short list of legal aid resources, I can share them. For now, I'm focusing on work, therapy, and steady saving. I'm tired, but I can see a small and honest life in front of me. Here are a few concrete templates and specifics that helped me and that you can adapt. For the repayment plan, write dates and exact amounts. For example, $50 every Friday for 8 weeks, with a final payment date and a clause that any missed payment triggers a written notice allowing a 7-day cure period. Include payment methods and receipts, bank transfer IDs, screenshots of completed transfers, and a note that the payment was received. For a mediation agreement, include names, ID numbers if possible, the mediator's contact, and a clause that both parties will not pursue criminal charges related to the dispute while the mediation terms are being followed. Add a contingency clause specifying how disputes about the agreement will be handled. When sending official letters, keep them factual and short. Dates, amounts, and a direct request for confirmation signed by the other party. If you need medical records or proof, request them formally and store copies in multiple secure locations. Look for community resources, law school clinics, nonprofit legal aid, and organizations that assist people facing false accusations. Ask the legal clinic if they can provide a template letter so you are not improvising legal language. Finally, small administrative habits protect you. Timestamp everything, store backups off your phone, and ask a trusted person to hold a copy of your files. Small consistent steps add up. Protect records, protect sleep, and prioritize slow rebuilding over immediate dramatic gestures. It is worth the patient work. Always. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and comment. Thanks for your attention.